Hello, it says we're live. Happy Friday, friends, joining me. Those of you catching the replay, hello, whenever you're fitting this in. This Scorpio new moon solar eclipse reading that my only goal with all the notes and stickies that I have gathered, all the things, is to hopefully help take some of the mystery out of the period of time that is about to unfold and give some tips about how do we navigate this energy. That's kind of always my goal, like how to help ourselves feel better as we navigate the energy, but especially with this one. When we step into Scorpio, we step into some dark realms of the human experience. And so we're going to get to that, that's part of what we're going to do. Um, but before that, I want to jump right in with a story that is out of Stephen Forrest's book, The Book of Water, where he talks about Scorpio. He tells a story about Scorpio and Taurus and this axis, this set of sister signs, and how the two of them work together. And he sets it as far as there's an old man walking along a path, and the old man, he takes one step forward and then another step forward, another step forward, another step forward. In this analogy, essentially this wise old man walking leisurely along the path, his left foot is wisdom and his right foot is peace. So wisdom and then peace, and then wisdom and then peace, and then wisdom and then peace. And Scorpio is our wisdom foot, and Taurus is our peace foot. So this actually might be in the Book of Earth where he talks about Taurus, but either way, it fits on both ends. But what he says is, like, if you came with like a really big emphasis in Scorpio, then like in your natal chart, then you came to get your wisdom foot forward. If you came with significant placements in Taurus, then you came to get your peace foot forward. And as we go along, the lunar nodes of the moon, the north node and the south node, they are in Taurus and Scorpio right now. The north node has been moving through Taurus since January, meaning the south node has been moving through Scorpio since January. And so this like new moon solar eclipse is kind of the halfway point of that larger 18-month transit. So again, we're going to get more into that, because my point with this wisdom foot, peace foot story that so beautifully articulates Taurus and Scorpio, it's like even during periods where we're going to have the Scorpio new moon solar eclipse, like that's the kind of theme, we still have to balance it with our peace foot. And so always, I feel like my cardinal rule of Scorpio is to have a good handle on your Taurus. Like, don't dive into the pool and swim so deeply that you don't know how to come back out. Taurus is really great for like how to come back out, how to be grounded, um, how to help yourself feel calm and peaceful. Like, you kind of need to know how to do that before you go crazy, like exploring the Scorpio end. So balance these wisdom foot and peace foot activities. And as far as the peace foot goes, and kind of going into this time of like, what are we going to see? I would say, like, the first thing I want to recommend, which I don't make a whole lot of recommendations, but this is what I'm going to do, is really focus into my foundation of gratitude for the bounties that I have already harvested. That's very much going to be a theme of the upcoming Taurus full moon that's in the early part of November, November 8th, I think, where we're going to get to see like really lit up in our world that we've manifested a lot for ourselves so far. Like, as far as the journey of our whole life, we've come so far. And we're really going to get to see that when we get to the full moon. But I'm going to like plant a seed here to go ahead and start looking at that, as far as like really appreciating just how far you've already come. Like, as far as the South Node has been transiting over Scorpio all year. Like, all of the release and the emotional healing that you have done, the energy clearing that you have done so far this year and your whole life. like, as grateful as we can get for just how far you've already come. Because total honesty, total transparency, what this new moon solar eclipse is going to show is like what journey, what healing is left as far as this is an opening of the next layer of healing work that we need to do, that, space is opening up for us to do. And that process is going to unfold basically until eclipses and new moons in general, they unfold for about 6 months. Like, the energy takes 6 months to really show itself. So, like, the Scorpio full moon 6 months from now, that's really gonna be like a culmination point of just how far we've come, um, which I kind of expect to kinda just be the illumination of the next level of healing work that we're gonna do, because as the we have the Scorpio full moon in May of 2023. And that's also when the Scorpio South node is going to be at this degree point where the Scorpio new moon is happening right now. So, like, that's happening at 2 degrees on October 25th. And the South node is going to be to 2 degrees May, June, and early July of 2023. So, as it closes out its Scorpio process, that's where we're going to see, like, the fruits of all of that healing are going to come as we move into South Node in Libra, North Node in Aries. There's a new expansion of ourselves happening as the North Node moves into Aries. That's really exciting. And so much of that new that's coming with the North Node in Aries, it has the space to come in because of our courage and our willingness to do the Scorpio South Node process of releasing any old or stagnant energy that is no longer serving us, is basically the purge that the South Node makes no matter what sign it moves through, is releasing the energies of that sign that are low frequency, stagnant, not serving you. So there's there's a lot of potential for kind of getting in over your head in the Scorpio energy. And that's again where I always back up to, like, it's called the window of tolerance. I forget where I picked that up so I can credit it, but it's like a thing out there, like a psychological concept, the window of tolerance. And it has to do with, like, our ability to feel uncomfortable emotions. Like, when we get so far away from the window of tolerance that we literally feel like our insides are breaking open and we can't breathe, we've gone too far. Okay. So, like, the window of tolerance is like Taurus, like peaceful, at equilibrium. Like, I feel good. I feel comfortable. I don't feel challenged in any way. I feel at rest. And then as we step outside our comfort zone, it feels worse and worse and worse and worse the further we get away. So, like, there's no like extra points for like diving all the way to the bottom, like just like that. Like, take it in layers and come back to take one step into wisdom and a step back into peace and a step back into wisdom and a step back into peace. Like, there's time. There's the next like 7 or 8 months until the South Node basically finishes being in Scorpio, that this next chapter of our healing gets to unfold. So there's no rush. There's no reason to think that we need to go looking for it. It's coming. It'll knock on our doors. It'll find us. It knows where we live. Um, Hello, everybody. Oh, hello. So glad to have you guys here for this Scorpio new moon solar eclipse. Like, I have just a little bit as far as like what is a solar eclipse, because a new moon is always going to be a new beginning, a new seed of potential that gets planted. Like, it reminds me of the aces in tarot, if you're familiar, like just the beginning, the possibility. Um, the initial preview that lets you see, like, oh, this is the journey that's coming. So when it's a solar eclipse, what that means is that the new moon is happening in the same sign where the nodes currently are. So that's why, like, while the nodes are in Taurus and Scorpio, the new moon and the full moon in Taurus and Scorpio, those are the eclipses because they're happening in the signs where the nodes are, which just means like it's basically supercharged lunation cycles when the moon and the sun are crossing over those nodes. So solar eclipses, they echo that new beginnings. They bring unexpected opportunities. Because the solar eclipse goes with the new moon, and that's when the moon and the sun are together, that is more likely to be an internal or emotional shift that as it plays out to like the Scorpio full moon would illuminate more of an external manifestation versus like the new moon in Scorpio is something that's happening inside of us that's going to lead us to choose different things or walk a different direction or, something that will eventually look different in the physical. I loved this part. Solar eclipses are us, like our soul sending out cosmic invitations. What do you think of that? What do you think that means? Like, how does that land for you? Sending out cosmic invitations. I'll tell you what I think it means. What it feels like to me is like this little seed of potential that, you know, I truly believe that our higher self doesn't keep us in the dark on what's coming because it's like cruel and thinks it's funny. Like, I think we truly only need to know what's coming in the future one bite at a time. Like any more than that, and it's not helpful and it's really not satisfying. It's just overwhelming to know, like, oh my God, I got to do this and this and this and this and all these thousands of steps to get where I'm going. Our higher self feeds it to us so lovingly, spoon feeding it to us. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean it in a loving way, like you would with a baby, like only a little bit and then wipe its little mouth. And I don't know how I fed a baby maybe twice in my whole life, but in a loving way of like you wouldn't take the jar and dump it on the baby. And our higher self doesn't do that to us either. Crack myself up there. So this seed of potential, this like each new moon, really, like every month we have one, this new moon seed of potential, it's us getting a glimpse at like not the whole entire future path, but like this next piece. And because I know I'm going to do this next piece, I'm going to move from here to here. That's not the whole thing. It's just this next piece. That is an invitation all by itself. Like, we don't have to be like, okay, well, I'm going to need a person to tell me this, and I'm going to need somebody to help me with this, and I'm going to need this. That is just known as far as the fabric of like the interconnectedness of the all. Again, this is very much like how Carly thinks it works. That as you can see, okay, this is what I'm aiming for, the universe is like, okay, she's ready. Bring her this person who's going to teach her how to meditate. And then, bring her this inspiration that's going to have her sit and meditate. And then bring her this experience, which is going to have her realize this. And then bring her, and it's like all of that part just unfolds when you have a sense of like what even is the path, what even is the part that you're working on. The universe brings the people that are going to help you do like the step by step by step. That's what I think the cosmic invitations to the universe means. Um, glad to hear that. Taurus ascendant, Scorpio descendant. Me too. How cool. I wonder if that's why, like my Scorpio descendant or our Scorpio descendant. What degree is your Taurus rising at by curiosity? Ooh, and then this last one on solar eclipses, realizing we need more than what we're currently receiving, which kind of goes along, I think, with like, like a new seed of potential. That's generally where the seed comes from, like that's the deeper like context or storyline as far as what's going on? Why do you want what you want? Like I think back to like my 2021 mantra of the year of speaking truth. I wanted that because I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my relationships. Like, I didn't just magically wake up one day and was like, "Oh, I think I wanna speak some more truth." I was feeling held back in my experience because I thought I had diagnosed the issue, that I wasn't willing to speak my truth, and so, okay, like, I'm realizing what I'm getting is an experience of feeling extremely limited in what I feel allowed to say, feel like I'm walking on eggshells. What I want, the seed that was planted at the very beginning of 2021 as I selected that mantra was, I want more freedom. I want more freedom in what I'm saying. and I want to speak my truth out loud. And that ended up being a whole journey. Oh, there you go, Maddie. Year of Speaking Truth video. Yeah, check that out if you're interested, because the goals, the pieces that we think we want, like I made the joke of like, yeah, that's what I diagnosed the problem as, was like, I'm not speaking my truth out loud. Long story short, the year of speaking truth, it ended up, the reason I wasn't speaking my truth out loud was because I didn't know what it was. Had nothing to do with the other person, like, holding me back, or, like, she's not gonna take it well, or what all these stories that I had about, I have to walk on eggshells. That's really what I thought, and I thought I knew my truth, I just wasn't letting myself say it, and when I got to a point where I was letting myself say it, I couldn't because I didn't know what it was. So, I feel like that has, like, a shade of this, like, Scorpio kind of energy, where Scorpio as a whole is about making the unconscious conscious, and that, like, that concept of, like, you think you know what the problem is, and so you're like, "Cool, I'm gonna work on this," and then as you do, as it unfolds, you realize, like, there's a deeper root happening here, and that's really the whole point, like, having a goal where you end up going in a completely different direction than when you thought doesn't make that a failure. Like, the path of least resistance gets us there however it can. And if the carrot that it uses is like, "I don't wanna walk on eggshells anymore, like, I'm ready to stand up for myself," like, I showed up. It got me to show up, and it got me to go through it far enough to realize, "Wait, I think my goal is wrong. I don't wanna speak my truth, I wanna know my truth. Let me start there, and let me go from there." And once I knew my truth, it was, like, barely relevant to, like, speak it in those situations where in the past I felt like I had been held back. Dude, you got a North Node in Pisces as well? Me too. Where you come from? You got all kinds of stuff in common. Yeah. Like, speaking truth sounds great, but in my experience, learning your truth is a whole phase, the whole chapter that comes before that. I tried to skip it. Life didn't let me. So, I have no worries that, again, we aim at what we think is the right answer, and what we get is exactly what we need. So, easy peasy. Um, let's see here. What else? Yeah, what is okay, so Scorpio new moon. Like, I don't I don't personally like to give a lot of recommendations around, like, how do you access your Scorpio energy, or like how to work with it, because to me that's like a very personal recipe as far as like where you're coming from. So perfect example of that is like, I to prepare for this and like get me back in the Taurus Scorpio headspace, I watched my Taurus North Node like nodal return video specifically for people who are Taurus North Nodes. And then I also watched my Scorpio North Node video for how Scorpio North Nodes, excuse me, can get the most out of this current Taurus North Node transit. And the recommendations on what to do with your Scorpio energy are completely different for those two groups of people. Like, if you're coming from past lifetimes of like almost too much Scorpio, like South Node in Scorpio, the answer is very different for what you should be doing towards Scorpio energy than if you're, what would be the like a Scorpio North Node. Like, you really need to run into the fire as a Scorpio North Node. And as a Scorpio South Node, it's like, get out of the fire. I get it that you like it in there, but you need to come out. I'm gonna crack myself up again. Thank you. So there's those two videos, the Scorpio North Node, which you could also watch if you have a North Node in the eighth house, or the Taurus North Node, which you could also watch if you have North Node in the second house. So instead of giving a recommendation of how to work with your Scorpio energy, I would rather talk about how to recognize it, how to find it within yourself, because part of my foundation of beliefs, and you're welcome to believe differently, but I believe we all have all 12 of the zodiac archetypes within us. So we all possess Scorpio energy. And working with it is more a matter of like recognizing what frequency your Scorpio energy is currently living at? Like, do you recognize it more in the lower frequency end of Scorpio, or do you recognize it more in the higher end of Scorpio? And so let's talk about more recognizing Scorpio energy within ourselves. And I would love to hear if this resonates as far as like being able to see this. Scorpio energy is raw emotional truth. Scorpio is, I wouldn't say not afraid to look at negative emotions. Scorpio is capable of being afraid of negative emotions and looking at them anyway. So there's like a tolerance for fear within Scorpio energy is my opinion. It's also emotionally intense. I think because emotions are intense. Like if we're being honest, like if you're talking honest emotions, they're intense. So that's yeah, like that's just truth in my opinion again. Um, ooh, Scorpio is territory where we can discover the unconscious motives driving ourselves and others. So those that we're in close relationship with and ourselves. Like Scorpio in general is the place where we go within our energy to make our unconscious conscious. So it's like a gateway between what exists in your unconscious realm and what has made it into your conscious awareness. Scorpio sits kind of on the border between the two, and Scorpio energy, how much you're able to engage with your Scorpio energy, is like scooping stuff up out of your unconscious and letting it come up into your conscious awareness, which can be intense. And I think that's where some people don't necessarily have a palate for Scorpio. But it also relates to intimacy, again, because of that emotional component where a big chunk of intimacy is that energetic connection between two people. Like if someone is emotionally unavailable, intimacy is basically impossible. So either your Scorpio gate is open and you're available for intimacy, or it's closed and that lets like that kind of stunts our ability to like have intimacy with other people, but I think more harmfully, it stunts our ability to have intimacy with ourselves. Where if we're not willing to face our emotional truth, like I think let me back up a step. Saying our emotional truth out loud, like communicating it to another person, like that was very much my goal going into my year of speaking truth was to be able to communicate my truth. But I realized, like, the first step was knowing it myself, and so I think, like, Scorpio, the first step is you being able to face your emotional truth inside of yourself. Communicating it outwardly is a completely different matter altogether. Sometimes that's gonna be helpful, sometimes it's not necessary, but, like, we have to face it. We have to know what it is in order to not be controlled by it, like leaving stuff in our unconscious or suppressing our emotions, which I was like the freaking queen of back in the day. Like suppressing our emotions just means that they're subconsciously trying to be expressed instead of consciously worked with. And when they're subconsciously trying to be expressed, they squeeze out the edges in really uncomfortable ways, is again my experience. Um, Scorpio also relates to trust and building trust with another person. I think that that's because, like, when we get into our full emotional flow, like full access to our emotions, we become highly intuitive beings. Like, when you're listening to your emotions, you're a human lie detector because you can feel the truth of everything that everyone ever says. And maybe that sounds like a superpower, kind of, I guess, but that just goes to show, like, every single superpower is also one of our greatest weaknesses because I would say it's more uncomfortable to exist in the world as what you feel like is a human lie detector because most people lie a lot of the time. And it's really awkward when you know somebody is, like, putting on a mask, and it's like, do I interact with their mask or do I address the deep sadness underneath? And I've mostly taken the route of just pretending I don't even see the mask and addressing the deep sadness underneath, in which most most of those scenarios end with the person like getting as far away from me as possible, which is totally fine if that's what they need to do. Scorpio also covers a big part of our vulnerability. So, our ability to be vulnerable, again, with other people, yes, but also just even with ourselves. Like sometimes there are pieces of ourself that we dislike so much, we refuse to look at them. And that stunts us inside of our energy. It pushes part of us out and does not let it exist consciously. Again, it doesn't go anywhere, it's just down in the subconscious, wreaking havoc in our relationship patterns, which are also a Scorpio thing. That's where Scorpio does relate to relationship patterns because every ounce of repressed emotion that we have within us will play out in the mirror of our closest relationships. The closer the relationship, the more potential that that relationship is going to bring a chunk of your repressed energy to the surface. So you have to look at it. And that looks like the other person triggering us or saying something to us that just crushes us. Like there's a deep vulnerability in being in relationship because we have to face all of the parts of ourselves that we previously haven't been willing to. So that's like, I think one word, if you were gonna put one word on Scorpio, it's fear. It's fear, and because of our fear, there are parts of ourselves that we do not accept. We don't wanna look at them, and you can't accept it if you're not willing to look at it. So, within that, I think the part that moves me the most is that when we have certain emotions like anger, loss, grief, apathy, guilt, shame, injustice. I don't know if that's an emotion, but I feel like I feel that way sometimes, like life's not fair or whatever. Sadness, disappointment, like when we don't allow ourselves to feel hard things, those are just a handful, couple handfuls of hard emotions to feel as a human. And if we tell ourselves that I don't want to feel that. I'm going to put that out of my mind. I'm just going to be positive. I'm going to just like get my shit together and like, keep calm and carry on kind of thing. It's like when we do that, we are, yes, suppressing that energy within ourselves. But then my belief is that our aura, like our overall energy, is spending part of our life force energy to not only keep that range of energy a secret from ourselves, but that to do that, it also has to suppress that energy in other people. Like other people who present with anger, if I'm repressing anger, I can't let them be angry. Like they're not allowed to be angry because we're not allowed to be angry. Like when I make that rule on myself, I make it on everybody else too. And that's the part that like really moves me to let myself feel every single thing I can kind of for myself because I get the mechanics of like I don't want to push the energy down into my subconscious because I'm not going to like what comes out of that. But also because I would never consciously tell anybody you can't feel that way. Like you don't get to feel that way. You don't get to be angry. Get over it. I wouldn't say that to them. So why would I ever say that to myself? So as I put it in that kind of a perspective, like part of what I think this new moon is asking for from us, like this solar eclipse that's going to unfold for, 8 months or whatever, like it's not that we need to be different at all. It's more like can you be more often the witness to just what's happening, like the raw emotional truth of what you're feeling, like emotions being messengers. So, what is the emotion trying to tell you? If you're angry, like that's a perfect example of when this is my understanding from like what I've read and seen, like when we feel angry, basically that's our reaction to a situation where on our deeper level in our subconscious, we know we have more power than we're executing and because we're witnessing other people have power over us or over the situation and whatever, like we get mad at them. And basically, anger is an invitation for your life force to like to come out and be exerted out in the world. And I love, 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 love Richard Rudd's quote from the Gene Keys, where he says, the first stage of awakening is to get angry. The first stage of awakening is to get angry. The first stage of awakening is to stop repressing your emotions, which means like one of the first stops along the way is anger. And especially for females, don't even get me started, anger is not usually allowed. Like we don't get praised for being angry and throwing temper tantrums. We get told cut that shit out. No. No. And we get taught how to repress our emotions. And that's true for men kind of as a whole. And I would say for women, we get taught how to repress our negative emotions and like how to be sweet and bubbly and happy and all of that. So, either way you look at it, like emotional repression is kind of part of culture. And emotional repression does have its place. Like maybe that's a second to like come back to this whole like earth energy, water energy, like Scorpio and Taurus, when like, that's basically what earth energy is emotional suppression. Capricorn is emotional suppression at its finest. It's stoicism at its finest. And that's where, like, maybe this kind of comes in the vein of like, give yourself grace if you're somebody who still mostly represses your emotions in total, or at least like a good big chunk of them, the more negative ones, more negative. Um, More negatively perceived ones. I think that's more accurate. But like Capricorn is a perfect example of basically it's like a strategic choice to suppress emotional input so that you can evaluate what is physically happening, where do we physically want to go, what are the physical resources that I have access to, how can I most effectively put them together, and how can I get us where we want to go. And you can't do that when you're swimming in a sea of grief and loss and anger and heartache. Like, it's very much one or the other. Okay. Like, so especially if you have a more dominant chart for earth placements, emotional suppression lets you be effective in earth energy. Like, that's the balance. Is like you kind of got to set them aside to some extent in order to rise above them. And that's really like rising above them. That's the earth energy side of it. And so, again, emotional suppression, like, it has its function. We humans don't do anything that doesn't help us evolve. So the fact that we can suppress is a good thing. There's also a lot of like in terms of trauma, like when we go into shock, when something is just like too big for us to handle, suppression is a coping mechanism. Denial is a coping mechanism because our body can only handle so much processing at once. And so, like, again, that's maybe a good place to loop back around to like wisdom foot, peace foot, like emotional exploration, coming back and chilling out with like a nice drink of water and some sun, like balancing what we're doing here and letting the emotional healing, letting like the suppressed emotions that have been racking up for this lifetime or any past lifetimes, like that those are going to come out in layers. And most likely, excuse me, most likely with this Scorpio new moon solar eclipse, that this is just going to be kind of the next layer of allowing ourselves to witness what emotions we're having, do more witnessing and less suppressing. Like, if I could, give you kind of a template as far as a starter intention for what this like new seed of potential could be for pretty much any of us, this is basically what I'm using is like to do more witnessing and less suppressing. Like, I don't need to control my emotions. If they're present, if there is some kind of something present, it needs my attention. And attention, like, doesn't necessarily promise a solution. It just says, "I don't know what the answer is, but Imma sit with you until we feel better." You know? Like, I'm gonna hold your hand. I'm gonna give you a hug until you feel better. And I'm talking about like me to me. And just be with those emotions and sit with them because as I have done so, like this is very much like a Scorpio process of like if you sit with it, it's like the initial feeling clears away and you drop into like the underneath feeling of like anger doesn't come out of nowhere. Like there's a deeper feeling, something like fear or grief or some kind of something that is usually like more expressed as anger. So, like, sitting with your anger, like, then drop into what is the underlying piece driving that? Maybe there's even an underlying, like, assumption underneath all of it, like a story or something that was misinterpreted, or like when you sink into your emotion, like the layers get revealed of like, where is this coming from? But this is what I'm saying about the window of tolerance. And it's like, especially from Go, like, I think of, like, if you're gonna be, like, a couch potato to running a 5K, like, they let you, like, go and, "This week, just walk around the block," Just get off the couch and just, like, don't sit on the couch. That's gonna be your week 1, and then week 2, maybe, like, twice around the block, and you build it up from there, so I think, like, as much presence as you can bring to witnessing whatever emotions you're feeling, great, and as much as you can, like, within that window of tolerance, like, stretching outside your comfort zone, like, oh, normally I would just, like, turn on the TV and whatever, like, instead of doing that, I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna set my timer for 60 seconds, and I'm gonna sit with this emotion, and then I'm gonna turn the TV on, because that's how I would normally cope with feeling this way, but I'm gonna give myself 60 seconds of attention first before I numb it out, and just like little baby steps of being more present with like what those emotions are and towards the goal of like really truly Scorpio, like until you know the truth of what it is that you're feeling, like if you're lost in the chaos of like the initial presentation and you just numb out that chaos, and you don't sink into the deeper understanding and the real truth of what that emotion came to tell you, it's really difficult to move on to the Pisces place where the third water sign is where we transcend. Where because we understand what that emotion was, what that experience taught us, we've integrated the lesson, we've released the part of the experience that, like, I hate that I had to go through that. I hate that that person did that to me, but I do forgive them because I learned this and I'm grateful that I have this lesson. And that's basically where you have Pisces energy of release and transcendence. And you can't really transcend until you understand like what happened there. And that's where again I go back to the first stage of awakening is to get angry. Like, so much of our pain is repressed, meaning pointed back inward, shoved back into ourselves, not allowed to come out. And when you get into exploring old pain, really the part that, why did you shove it in there in the first place? The answer might be because if I let this come out, I'm going to be really freaking angry with my mom. And I don't know how to deal with that. So instead of moving forward, I just keep that pain in here because I can't be angry with her. That's disrespectful. Like, she's done so much for me. Like, this is me talking out of my own experience. And because that was my perspective on it, um, it came to me as an angry dream where for 3 nights in 1 week, I had this dream, what felt like all night long. Every time I was with a different person, but every time I was so mad at them. I was like, God, it just makes me want to cry thinking about like my whole entire body was just consumed with this rage. And I had that dream like all night long. And the first morning I woke up and I was like, that was so weird. Like, I always have good dreams. Like, I never have bad dreams. Like, what was that? I don't know. God, just like, Abraham, help me feel better. And basically just moved on with my life. And then a couple nights later, same dream, different people, different setting, different experience, but the same exact feeling of just like pure rage, like fire, anger. And when I woke up the second morning, as I was, like, laying there, like, in the half asleep place, the first thought that came was, "What is this?" And the second thought immediately was, "Mom." And I was like, I'm angry like this at my mom? No. And I moved on with my life because clearly that's ridiculous. Couple nights later, I had the angry dream again, and I woke up that morning being like, "Okay, so if this is about my mom, like, I'm ready to explore because I'm freaking sick of having this dream." It's like the worst thing ever to be locked in a prison of rage for, like, 8 hours, and yeah, okay, I'm ready to explore. And so I started exploring, like, just, writing down in my journal basically like, "Okay, so I had the angry dream again for the 3rd time in a week. I know that my intuition told me it's about my mom. I don't know why I'm angry with her. Oh, wait, it just reminded me of this experience where she said this thing, and that broke my heart. And I remember crying in the shower, and I remember this, and that really, really, really hurt. And I can see where I never really got to process that pain. And so this is like all in my little exploration thing of like, wow, I hadn't thought about that in like 20 years. Yeah, you're right. That sucked. You didn't deserve that. And kind of just sit with myself and validate that I am angry that she said that to me and that she treated me like that when I'm just a child. And that's not fair. And I shouldn't have been treated that way. And like for my inner parent, like my inner parent Carly to be on the same side as inner child Carly. Like inner child Carly was still very upset about having been told what she was told. And by repressing my anger towards my mom, what I was doing was taking this hurt inner child and like locking it in the basement. And like, you don't get to express because you're not being appropriate. So that was the first one, and it went on for pages, and, like, by the time I stopped, I mean, there wasn't all of it, but, like, I got, like, 4 or 5 memories that, like, I wouldn't say they were, like, repressed, I knew they had happened, but, like, I hadn't thought about them in decades, and as I pulled that thread of, like, why might I be angry with my mom? It was, like, all of these different experiences of times where she hurt my feelings and I never dealt with it. So it's not like she's a horrible person or there's even any action to take now. Like, I don't feel the need to, like, do anything with her about this, but I did need to sit with that emotion, and I did need to honor that I did feel that way, that there was a part of me kinda out in the cold that was angry with her that I wasn't letting myself get angry. And because I was repressing that, here I am having this dream, and I'm like, "God, what?" Finally, I was like, "Okay, that's enough. We're not having the angry dream anymore. What do you want from me? I'll do it, whatever it is. Stop putting me in there. I don't want this." So, yeah, anger is not super comfortable. Like, it feels like fire burning through us. Like, it's not comfortable. And yet, oh, it reminds me so much of the book club that we're doing right now. So, this is a free thing that we're doing through the meetup group, and we're working through the 4 stages, the 4 sections of Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. And we had the first session. That recording is out on the channel. If you want to get caught up and join us, we would love to have you. And the reason I bring this in here is because the next session that we're having, which I believe is on November 5th. Yes, the first Saturday of November, and it's at 11 a.m. Central Time. And we'll just meet and chat about that section of the book. But the section of the book the second section is called Inferno. Inferno. And that to me feels like a whole lot of anger, a whole lot of processing old pent up shit that we got to get out. We got to burn through the conditioning that taught us we're bad so that we can come out the other side and know how good we truly are. So I do recommend like that book as far as like a companion to this upcoming Scorpio season, where I think it's safe to say that we're going to have some things coming up from our unconscious into our conscious, some new awareness, that's very much in the stars for what we've got coming to us here in the next few weeks. And like I said, like playing out until the Scorpio South Node kind of does its last dance through the end of Scorpio in July of next year. So I was gonna say something else. Oh, yeah. So come to the book club if you want, or if you're not available, they are recorded and the second session will be out on the channel shortly after we have it there on November 5th. But you are definitely welcome. Maddie sent the invite for part 2, Inferno. So if you RSVP through the meetup group, which is totally free, that's how you'll get the Zoom link to be able to join when it's time on November 5th. And then Maddie, will you also grab the the link to the recording of the first one? Or maybe you did already. But if not, will you grab because the first one is the Dark Wood of Error. And to quickly recap that one in case you are interested in jumping in here going forward, the Dark Wood of Error is basically when we are under the effect, under the influence of what culture taught us is the right way to be, the right way to do life, the right way to build a good future, the right way to be successful. Culture teaches us a lot of things, whether we signed up to learn them or not, like, whatever you believe about choosing to be here at this time. I think we all kind of signed up for being indoctrinated with the culture we were born into. And then coming out of the dark wood of error and entering into the inferno, you pass through the gate to hell. And to me, that has serious Scorpio connotations of like being willing to walk through one of the hell gates. Um, Over the top of the gate, it has a sign that says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," and enter into the inferno where everything that's not you is going to get burned away and it will no longer be part of the energy that you carry forward. And I think this Scorpio South Node transit, the whole 18 months, is very much helping us to do this. Like her book, I think just came out last year, maybe even like the end of last year. So it's a relatively new book, and it goes so well with this process of purging that old pain and old stagnant energy out of the Scorpio end. In order to do that, we have to face some really hard things. And there's a reason that I would say probably most people don't ever go through the gate to hell. They don't ever go to the inferno. They stay in the dark wood of error until they pass and they come back and maybe do it again. Um, it takes a lot of courage to walk through the gate to hell and come face to face with your demons. And your demons are the thoughts. They're the thoughts that say, "Oh, I would love to write a memoir. I love to tell my stories. I love to, like, I think I'm an okay writer. Like, I think I could do that. Like, how fun would it be to write a memoir?" And then the thought comes that says, "Who the hell are you to write a memoir? Who do you think is going to read that?" That's a demon. That's a demon guarding the gate to hell. That's a demon terrifying you, terrorizing you. It's your own demon terrorizing yourself into staying in the dark wood of error instead of moving forward, writing the memoir and going on into the rest of your life. Like the demons try to keep you safe by culture's standards. And so the demons, they say basically the same thing that we've been conditioned to believe. And so when you come into the inferno and you face your demons, you're coming face to face with your cultural conditioning. And she says, like, in order to get to paradise, you've got to divorce culture. You can't make culture happy. You can't jump through their hoops and abide by your true nature at the same time. You can try. And that's kind of what the dark wood of error is like trying to get successful by society's terms and be happy. And usually we come out of the dark wood of error when we get sick of how unhappy we are. We get sick of how physically depleted we are. And it's because we have nowhere to go but up that we're finally willing to walk through the gate to hell and let it burn away the parts of us that aren't us. And we move tender into the next part and on into paradise, which is the end. Which paradise sounds like a sunny beach, out by the ocean. As she describes it, paradise is being inwardly lit up, knowing your own true nature and how to live from that place. And then you go back into the dark wood of error where you can help the others. You can help the others to take their dissatisfaction with their lives, AKA they're in the dark wood of error, and you can help them find their way to what is the hell gate that needs to be accessed. And you can be with them as they walk through this really scary thing that they did not want to face. You can be there to support them, and then they're on their journey, and then you go back into the dark wood of air and you get the next one. You take them to their hell gate and you send them into the Inferno. Have fun. And then you go get the next one. And that's freaking paradise. I'm like, yes, sign me up. We need to have a free book club. So we are. Ooh, Maria says, OMG, I have had so much rage the past few months, rehashing past things and my past mistakes. I'm glad Pluto is finally direct so I can put my lessons into action. Absolutely. I think, well, and like that was something else I was going to share is Pluto just turned direct last week, um, right around the same time that we had what was it, the Libra full moon? Aries full moon there. And then um, right after the Scorpio new moon, we have Mars, the other ruler of Scorpio, the ancient ruler of Scorpio, turning direct, or sorry, turning retrograde on the 30th of October. And then we'll be retrograde and we'll go basically all the way back, excuse me, to the beginning of Gemini. And then we'll come back. And so I do think that, like, there's a tandem in those 2 that, like, we just finished the Pluto retrograde and it's now direct, like, we can put our lessons into action about, like, claiming more of our power and, like, coming from a more empowered place, owning that for ourselves, and then it's like Mars, the more personal planet in Gemini, can get really clear and get some new ideas about, like, okay, so now that I'm a more empowered version of myself, now how do I act in the world? How do I choose to be? What do I choose to say? What do I choose to look at? What do I choose to listen to? What questions do I have? What answers do I want to figure out? Like, Mars can kind of reevaluate, like, the direction that your attention is pointing now that you are more empowered. Is it possible, or can you find a 1-degree turn where you could point your mental attention at whatever lines up better with your more empowered self? So I see, like, the Pluto lessons around our power and empowerment and transformation and, like, releasing the past and all of that has brought us to a new place. And now we're ready to live from that new place. But that process takes a second to figure out. And to me, that's, like, very much represented in the Mars retrograde timeline, where I believe Mars will be in Gemini, um, turning direct. Is it, like, right before the end of the year or right after, like, early January? Either way, Mars then is in Gemini until March, like, end of March, I think. And so this is a post about Mars from the YouTube channel Galactic Mystic. I've mentioned her a couple times. I really dig her style. And this is only a couple short paragraphs, so I wanted to read this. So Mars is slowing down, getting ready to station retrograde on the 30th while opposing the galactic center, which the galactic center, I believe, is at 28 or 29 degrees of Sagittarius. It's like the literal center of the galaxy, which moves ever so slightly year after year. As this shapes up, Mars will be in a quincunx aspect, which I believe is uncomfortable. Oh, yes, it is. Quincunx aspect with Pluto, both rulers of Scorpio, which is uncomfortable, to put it mildly. So that's talking about on the 30th, but with Mars moving so slowly as it approaches its retrograde, like, this energy, I would think, is basically already in play by the time we get to this new moon in Scorpio. We're kind of already feeling that discomfort of them in that uncomfortable relationship. This is an opportunity to break free of our chains, but it's never quite that simple, is it? In order to break free, we have to find where they're holding us. In that, we must staunchly refuse any shame that tries to settle in around how could I let it be like this for so long, or whatever your story happens to be. We are always doing our best. Always. I love her style. She's very, like, self-empowering while also, like, giving a big dose of grace of, like, "Let yourself off the hook. We're doing the best we can." So that's Galactic Mystics channel, if you wanna go check her out. But, yeah, I can see where it could be a rocky couple months, like, as we go through this initial coming into the Scorpio new moon solar eclipse. Like, I don't for reference, you could probably look back to, um, May, mid-May was when we had the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, was like May 15th and 16th, I wanna say, and holy shit. That was pretty intense. It was, like, very intense for me personally. I wonder if you guys resonate with that, if you had, like, an intense emotional release slash volcano happen at that time, and again, mine was a lot related to the anger I feel about my childhood, and like, my story is probably like, "I thought I healed that already." Like, I thought I got over that already. And then it's like, "Oh, no, but there's still this layer that was deep down in there. You didn't touch this part yet. Here, look at this one." I'm like, "Ugh, okay, fine." And I think the thing to keep in mind, this is, I think, maybe a Scorpio thing, maybe not, but I have this mantra when I'm hurt, that could be physically or emotionally, that says, "Pain is temporary. Pain is temporary." And I use it as whatever it is to get me apart from the pain so that I can be witnessing the temporary nature of the pain. And again, that could be my emotional pain. Like if I'm crying really hard, like I feel like my heart is like wrenching apart, like I'll tell myself pain is temporary. And then I can get into that witness seat to where I can see the intensity of the emotion that's like coming through me. And then as I sit with it and I watch it and I cry it out and I let it come, you can slowly see how the waves aren't quite as high. It's like petering itself out kind of thing, like blowing off steam, like the air is coming out of the balloon. And that's why I truly believe like well, actually, I think it was in the Gene Keys book again, Richard Rudd said, like, when you enter into laughter or crying, you enter into a transformational space where your energy is literally transformed. So while it does feel like you're just like marinating in the pain, like sitting there dying and it's never going to end, all pain is temporary, all energy ebbs and flows. So if while you're in it, that's one of the ways that like as far as how do you come back to the window of tolerance, like I think if you get into that deep place of like sitting and sinking into your pain and you get there and you're crying and you can't breathe and you're like I got that's enough. I can't do it anymore. And pain is temporary. So yes, I've opened this and this energy is going to come through me, but if I watch it will, like, slowly be less and less until it's over, and then I can breathe, and it's over. T Pain is temporary. So, that works for me. I don't know if anybody else has ever tried anything like that or if it would work for you, but, yeah, that's something that, like, helps me kinda come back to that window of tolerance. I would love to hear if anybody else has any ideas as far as like how do you come back when you're deep in your emotions or your energy is overwhelming you with how intense it is, which is a Scorpio thing, emotional intensity. How do you pull back into your window of tolerance? Another one, because Taurus is that balancing point for Scorpio. Another one that comes to mind, I had this was good energy. I felt really good, but then it, like, got so intense, it was, like, not comfortable anymore. It was, like, so excited that my muscles were, like, tensed up, and I was like, my body, ow." It was really hurting my system, like, blowing out my circuits with how intense this energy was. Even though it felt good, it didn't feel good because of how intense it was. And with that, I tried to go get a drink of water, and I, like was trying to get the water and I just like couldn't breathe. The energy was so intense and my instinct kicked in and I was like, go outside. I'll be able to breathe when I get outside. And so I go outside and I could breathe somewhat easier. And then I noticed that Dolly was like on the downstairs porch and I had like come out on the upstairs porch. And so I was like, "Oh, look, there she is. She calms me down. Let me go down there and see her." And because I was gonna go do that, I, like, walked out in the grass in my bare feet, and, like, it's morning, so it's all dewy. So, like, the wet and the grass and the planet, I didn't even ever make it down to see Dolly. I just, like, walked some laps in the yard with my bare feet touching the planet, and what it felt like was almost instantly it was like my container, my vessel now was like way bigger because it included the planet because we were all connected together. So now my circuitry was way bigger. And like there was almost an instant relief as now there was room for this energy to like go into the planet. It wasn't just in me. So that's another one, earthing in general. Like I mean, some people practice that like every day on purpose. They like give themselves a dose of like connecting their bare skin to the planet. At this point, I mostly use it like that as far as a like an emergency relief valve. I've done it a couple times since then too. Another time where I was holding space for somebody else who was processing a big emotional wave and I felt like I had that in my system, like walking away from that moment. And I, again, by instinct, like just followed what felt like it needed to happen. It felt like I needed to go outside, put my feet firmly on the planet, and shoot the energy out of myself and into the planet. And that's what I did. I don't know how that works, but that's what it felt like. And so I do think like that's a good place to start when you're approaching Scorpio energy, kind of like, when you want to go scuba diving, like in real life, they don't just take you to the ocean and like put you in. They take you to a classroom and they explain to you, like, how does your oxygen tank work? Like your life support, how does that work? And how do you know when it's failing? And what do you do if it's failing? And how do you get back to the surface in a safe way? Like this safety protocol around like, we can't just dive down to the bottom of the ocean and hope for the best because we can't breathe underwater. And I think with our emotions, it's a lot the same way. We can drown in them if we don't know how to come back out. Like, I feel like I lived for like 15 years in chronic depression because I was in my Scorpio and didn't know how to come out. I didn't know how to come out of my emotions and yeah, anyways. So this concept of how do you go back to your window of tolerance to have like almost like a tether, like you can like take the rope and like put it around your waist and then like you got some slack and like you're really like a miner like going in with your slack so that if anything happens, you can use the rope and like pull yourself back to safety. Like I don't take it lightly when we get into the territory of the energy that you repress. Remember, that is your defense mechanism. That's a survival instinct to wall off from your perception anything that's too much. So, if you don't have the coping skills for it, it gets repressed. So, going into the land of repressed emotions, like get your coping skills ready. Like get your Kleenex, get your rope on, get your like go outside, stand on the planet, like get yourself together before you go in there is always my opinion. And obviously, like when we find ourselves in the wave of emotion, like we didn't walk in there on purpose, we're just there. It's like that's when, as often as we can practice getting back to the window of tolerance when it's easy, when we can be deliberate about it, I think that just makes it that much more of like a regular habit for when we're really in like a triggered, like emotionally overwhelmed place. Like I said, like with that really intense positive energy, I couldn't breathe and yet my instincts took me outside because you'll feel better if you go outside. So I do think like practicing those how do you feel better? How do you practice being inside a comfortable, safe, at rest place? Practicing being there is like strengthening the rope of like how to pull yourself back when you do go too far into the Scorpio end of things. Uta says, for me, I like the advice to feel it, but not get into the story around it. So I think that's like something that I wanted to add back over here. Okay, so Scorpio Taurus, it like as an axis, like what do those two signs have in common? I think when you put them together, you get true power, and not power over another, like not, power over the world, or like even power necessarily to manifest like at will what you need in the world, but like true power coming from a place of self mastery. Um, and from there, like self mastery sounds really fancy, in my opinion. Sounds like, oh God, where do I even start? And I like Liz Gilbert's advice of curiosity over passion. Like she says, the advice of like chase your passion, follow your passion, find your passion, whatever. Like it's cruel because if you had a passion, you would already be following it. That's the nature of passion. So like the fact that you don't have it yet like means that okay, it's not here. How does passion come when it's not big enough yet? She says it comes as curiosity. It comes as like breadcrumbs of curiosity. Like I'm curious about moss. So I look into moss and I find out like this about how that relates to feminism. Oh my gosh, really? And then I find out like it's just curiosity. She's not passionate about moss. She's curious about moss, was the story she was telling. Um, and so, like self mastery from a standpoint of curiosity and following the breadcrumbs and being curious with ourselves, curious with the emotions, and curious with the stories. Like, I think again, everybody, I try not to give advice about how to work with your Scorpio energy because it really does depend on where you're coming from and where you're headed. I have no concept for where anybody else is around that, but for me, it's like when you put Scorpio and Sagittarius together, especially the stories around the things are very interesting. Like to tell us what's still repressed. Like the way our story sounds, I mean, as I've healed, my story around my mom has gone through, like, just as an example, has in like my childhood, let's say that, like, is a better example. Like, I think about when I very first like went to college, I was so, like, angry about my childhood and how unfair it was and yada, 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 and then I moved to Dallas and I got a perspective where I'm like, "Wow, I think my childhood was actually, like, really good," and then I learned some shit that, like, just made me mad again about what happened in my childhood, so there was, like, another process to go through. Like, the story around it reflects the healing underneath. So the way that we choose to tell our story, I think, is very relevant to kind of being curious with the woundedness that's still trying to be healed. Like, I don't remember who said this or where I saw it. I wish I could give credit, but basically it was like the stories we tell are our ego trying to get our needs met. So when we listen to somebody's story, or when I listen to somebody's story, that's what I'm listening for. It's like, how does this version of this story meet their needs? And by listening to the story, you can kind of reverse engineer or like work backward, like what are going into telling the story, what were the unmet needs that caused this version of the story to need to be told? And so that's like just a little bit like how I would tie it together as far as like feeling the emotion is definitely necessary from the Scorpio standpoint. But as you sit with that emotion and as you sink into it, the story, other memories, like those are the layers of like what you're going to sink into. It could be a story about what happened. And as you sit with your story, that actually clears away and a new understanding is underneath that, or maybe a new story or a new memory. And as you sit with that one clears away. And underneath all of it, like when you get down to the very bottom, there's just love. Like when you source back all emotion, when you like get to the root of all emotion, like all water energy, it's love. So when you sink far enough into Scorpio, eventually, like, and this is kind of from the way of integrity too, when you sink far enough into hell, you don't have to turn around. You just keep going because eventually you get to the center of the earth, hell, and if you just keep going, you're climbing back up. You're climbing out now. You never switched directions, you just kept going and you eventually find your way there, and I think Scorpio energy works a lot like that. It's like if you'll sink into it far enough, eventually you'll come out the other side in love. I don't know. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? Um, yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm glad I got to mention that piece about curiosity and like kind of tying that back together with, we don't have to be different, but can we be like 1% more the witness to what's coming up? And our story is part of that. Our story is how we express ourselves, and we can learn a lot about ourselves and what our needs are by listening to the stories that we want to tell. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's good. I'll maybe leave you with that. The first stage of awakening is to get angry. Richard Rudd. And if you're wanting a guide into your shadows, I highly recommend Gene Keys. The Gene Keys are one of the best tools that I've ever found for like teasing apart the shadow frequency and not just leaving you there. Like the way he does it, basically his philosophy is that every shadow contains a gift. And so when you enter into the shadow, you naturally will find your way to the gift. And that is beautiful. And his hopes is that like the reflections and the contemplations that he's outlined for each of the different gene keys, it helps to bring you into the shadow as a gateway or a portal into your gifts. So, highly recommend. I will give you a fair warning though. It can feel a little bit like being called out for your shit. It's like, he's got my number, huh? Like, he can see into my inner world and he knows my unconscious self better than I do. Like, we as humans, especially with egos, like we don't often enjoy looking at our shadow patterns. And that's basically like Gene Keys. Step number one is like, here, look at your shadow. And then from there, you walk your way into the gifts that are contained within those shadows. But it can be a little bit of a rude awakening. So I would say, like, if you're ready to do some exploring this Scorpio season into your shadows, Gene Keys is a great place to go. When you when you pull your chart, if you scroll down to the chart itself over to the right, there's a place where you can listen to your contemplation for your life's work gene key. So whatever the I guess the life's work goes along with your sun sign. So it would be like the correlate of that. There's 6 gates inside of each sign. So if you have like a Gemini sun sign, for example, like I do, then your life's work is going to be one of those 6 gates from the Gemini section of the chart. So the life's work gives you that contemplation. It's like 15 to 20 minutes of him talking about like the shadow of that gene key, the gift, and the highest expression. And basically, his philosophy is that our life's work is to transform whatever that shadow pattern is. And so, step number one to doing our life's work is to be able to notice that shadow pattern, to be able to see where we've already healed it, to see where it's still coming up in our life, and where we can continue to heal it. And yeah, like just as far as a guide for how to not get lost in the massive, murky, mysterious waters of Scorpio, like I think Gene Keys would make an excellent guide if you were looking for one. I am going to wrap it up here. I thank you so much for joining me. I have absolutely had a blast doing this. I've been looking forward to this one for so long. Um, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would consider putting a like on this video. That very much helps the channel. Appreciate it very much. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. I have been putting out a lot of content lately. I had like a backlog of some voice recordings, like 20 of them, and converting those and putting them out. So, yeah, the calendar's pretty full. New videos almost every day. And I live stream every Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time. So, if you're interested in hanging out with us some more, please consider subscribing. And until next time, dear friends, I hope you take such good care of yourselves, really pamper yourselves. Remember to put your peace foot forward as we go through this Scorpio season. And I will see you soon. Have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye. Okay, bye.